County.
Accomack County. Sorry.
Caitlin Sinclair, Henrico County, actively joining CRS.
Bruce Herbert, Accomack County.
Tom, Accomack County, Class 5.
Christy Parrish, James City County, Class 5.
Sarah Rue, James City County, Class 5.
Marie Benavidez, Henrico County, actively joining CRS.
All right, Lucas, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly? And then we'll do a couple of updates and then turn it over to you to start us off.
Yeah, thanks so much. Lucas Manweiler, Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program, managing the bipartisan infrastructure law funding coming through our office.
Awesome. Thank you guys all for being here. And for the folks attending in person, they have access to coffee and donuts as a not so subtle bribe for your engagement and participation today. So we are going to start off by launching the poll for all CFMs. If you're a certified floodplain manager, please be sure to mark in the poll that you are so that you can receive your CECs for this meeting. Just a couple more folks, and then we will close the poll. I'll be sure to send around a sign-up sheet before the meeting ends, so you guys get your CECs too. Okay, doesn't look like the last couple of people want their CECs today. For our last meeting, we did get 2 credits, which was better than the last couple of meetings. Thank you, Anita. This is our regular plug for the Virginia Floodplain Management Association. I was recently elected to the Board of Representatives for the VFMA. Thank you all if you voted. Membership is extremely affordable, and we hope to see you at the conference this year. There's also the ASFPM conference coming up in June. If you'd like more information about registration, please refer to the PowerPoint that I'll send out after this with links. As always, we like to call out Emily as our ISO specialist for the state, CRS specialist. If you have any questions above and beyond what we are able to help you with here, she is our main point of contact. And these will be the cycle visits coming up this year. And we are going to pass over that and turn it over to Lucas to start us off. Lucas, if you'd like to share your screen.
Yeah, I'll do that now. Oh, I think it says disabled screen sharing.
I will fix that.
Sorry. And if it's easier, I can just send the presentation to you and you can present if that's easier.
Here, let's see. You should be able to have permission now, Lucas.
Great. Yeah, it looks like I'm good.
Okay, great.
All right, hopefully everybody can see that correctly. Great. Well, thanks again, Savannah. So my name's Lucas Manweiler, and I am the conservation coordinator brought on with the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program to manage the bipartisan infrastructure law's climate ready coast funding coming through our office here at Virginia CZM, funded through NOAA's Office of Coastal Management. So just wanted to give a brief introduction for what the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program is, and then also talking about the specific funding coming through our office for this opportunity. So the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program is a networked program housed out of the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality here in Richmond, Virginia. We operate by receiving funding from NOAA's Office of Coastal Management, and then distribute that funding throughout the coastal zone to our partners in the form of grants for environmental conservation and technical assistance. Our partnership makes up the coastal policy team, which is made up of partners in local government as the coastal PDCs and the state agencies operating within the coastal space. The bipartisan infrastructure law was a piece of legislation passed in 2021 focused on increasing the nation's resiliency. And with that, the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Office of Coastal Management received funding to bolster the resiliency of specifically of our nation's coasts, both the communities within them and the environments, the ecosystems that make up our coasts. So that took the form of the Climate Ready Coasts Funding Initiative, which are annual national competitions. They began in 2022 and are anticipated to continue until 2027, where each coastal state can submit up to 3 applications for funding that will compete on a national level for the receiving funding. These grants are multi-year in project. They can be up to 4 years with a 5th year of extension. And government entities, so anything from towns, localities to planning district commissions or state agencies, as well as federally recognized tribal nations and conservation nonprofits are eligible applicants for this funding. And specifically with that, there is an emphasis on assisting underserved communities and incorporating groups that maybe have historically been left out of the conservation conversation into these grants. So, large partnership is definitely key, even if it is a larger entity applying as the main applicant. So the first type of project that is eligible are land acquisition projects for land conservation. These projects can be up to $6 million. Typically, the range is from about 2 to 3 million, most likely. And the property, once acquired, must have some sort of public accessibility. This doesn't have to be 24/7 access or any sort of like constant passive access. It can be something as simple as a section of the property is publicly accessible and the rest is not, or maybe just events are held on an annual basis that allow the public to come out and use the property. In addition, the property must be held by a governmental organization, either in fee simple ownership or by a conservation easement. So with that, a conservation nonprofit is eligible to be the applicant for this, but they need to be working with some sort of maybe locality or state agency to be the final recipient of that land. Next up, we have habitat restoration projects. Again, these are up to $6 million with kind of a typical range of about $2 to $3 million per project. This funding is for restoration that will take place on public land of some sort. So either public ownership or publicly eased land. Conservation NGOs are welcome to be the primary applicants on these as well. But they will need to be working with some sort of public entity to receive access to the land that the actual restoration will be taking place on. And again, because as I mentioned before, these projects are up to 4 years with a 5th year possible of extension for monitoring of the restoration to make sure that everything has been successful. And last up, we have habitat restoration planning projects. These projects are really intended for a group that maybe has not had the historic capacity or funding in order to get all the documentation needed for the things that are needed in order to permit the project or anything like that, and are really intended to be more short term. project. So the group would apply for the funding, maybe get the partners that are needed for the project and the stakeholders and the permits, and then would go on to apply for another funding source for the actual implementation of the restoration within about a year's time frame or so. So just as a quick explanation of the application process and the timeline, the notice of funding opportunity is released yearly. That just stipulates all the specific information about what can be expected for the grants, how much, all that sort of things. That's expected early this summer, around May or early June. And then with that, the letters of intent, which is the initial application, will be due to us at Virginia CZM, most likely around middle July or so. The coastal policy team that I mentioned before will review the letters of intent that are submitted to Virginia CZM and be scored in order to select the top 3 projects. I can share both the letters of intent template and the scorecard with everyone if anyone is interested, so they can kind of get an idea of how the projects will be scored and what makes a competitive project. And then with that, we will then work with the top 3. We being Virginia CZM will work with the top 3 projects to just work out any kinks or see maybe where they lost points to make that as competitive as possible before sending those on up to NOAA for the national competition around mid-August or so. With that, NOAA will respond back to us and let us know if any of the letters of intent were selected for full proposal. And then any full proposals will be due around January or so of the following year. So all in all, it's about 8 months or so of an application process. But we at Virginia CZM and specifically myself are here to assist in any ways that we can, especially if you've been once your project has been selected as one of the top 3 that will be submitted to Virginia. It's really our intention to help out any way we can with writing that project and making sure that it's as competitive as possible. So with that, if anyone has any questions on this funding or anything that I need to explain a little bit better, and I can also share this presentation and my information after the meeting. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Lucas, for your presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes.
Oh, okay. We're going to turn it over to Chris with Newport News.
Great.
For the habitat restoration planning, it says that restoration is to begin after that. Can those 2 be combined? And so the funding was 500,000, but for the actual project, it's up to 6 million.
Yes. So the restoration planning projects, I think the intention is for that would be an organization that really hasn't had, or it's the elements of an actual restoration project are kind of outside of their capabilities, if that makes sense. I think generally this would be more like a some sort of small nonprofit or locality that hasn't had the ability to put together an actual restoration project before or gather the partners that would be needed to do that. There's definitely elements of the planning that can go into the restoration projects themselves. There is an element of shovel readiness that NOAA likes to see on these projects. I think with the idea being, the sooner they can get done, the better. But NOAA understands that having a project fully permitted and ready to go is sometimes outside of the the realm of possibilities for every single project. So there are definitely parts of the planning side that will be present in a restoration project. But if you're still kind of in those stages of identifying the partners and the stakeholders and identifying the permits that would be needed, I think the planning would definitely be the more appropriate project type.
That makes sense, Chris?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Did
you.
anybody virtually attending have any questions? I don't see any hands raised. All right, then with that, we'll say thank you, Lucas, for giving us some of your time and that presentation. And we will let you go because I know you have some other meetings you have to get to today.
Thank you all so much. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out.
And would you be able to share your presentation with us so we can send it out to the work group?
And the school.
For sure, I'll share this right after I hop off. Thanks again.
And we had a question, if you could share the scorecard.
Yes, yeah, I can share the letter of intent template that we have, and then the scorecard as well, and the presentation. And I'll also throw in just a PDF I have of kind of funding opportunities that are similar to this that I've been tracking, just in case maybe this one doesn't seem like the best fit. There are lots of funding going around right now.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Lucas.
Thank you so much.
Bye. And we will now turn it over to Kristen Owen. She's going to be giving us an update about Henrico County's ongoing flood map update process and their outreach campaign. Kristen, are you ready to share your screen?
Yes, give me just a second to make sure my camera. Just gonna make sure my camera's lined up, sorry.
Awesome.
Figure out which screen it's going to. Okay, do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, I'm gonna present today on our FEMA flood map update outreach efforts. So talking about communicating flood risk and really how we've been trying to create an inclusive and meaningful outreach approach. It is hard. So I'm going to talk about a lot of challenges that we've faced and just a lot of some of the lessons learned. We're not done. We're still in the thick of it. So just want to talk very briefly about the map update process. I'm not really going to get into the weeds of that. I think everybody on this call probably is familiar with what happens when we have to adopt new maps, but I'm going to talk a little bit about our plan for outreach, do more of a deep dive into a parcel analysis that we did, really focus on the outreach tools. And then throughout, I'm going to talk about the challenges and lessons learned, just kind of as we go along the way. So our FEMA map update process started in 2016, before I even lived in Virginia again. So it took a very, very long time. It kept getting delayed, postponed. We've had staff changes. In 2021, after I took over at the county, we ended up having our flood risk review meeting, our preliminary maps were released, and we had our community coordination and outreach meeting. So everything kind of happened all at once. During that time, we identified that FEMA left a bunch of HEC2 models in the county that they never actually updated because their policy for updating HEC2 models changed in 2016 or sometime around that time. So they decided they were not going to change it for ours. They would just continue on. I don't know if they anticipated it taking almost a decade to finish, but we were left with at least 6 major streams that HEC2 models. And if you're not familiar with that, HEC2 models were done in like the 70s. You can't even get the program on your computer anymore. And the results of that model are usually just a PDF printout that was like scanned in. Sometimes you can't read it. Sometimes it's crooked. Sometimes there's not one at all, of just like a table of the results from the model. So really unhelpful for managing floodplain development. So because of this, FEMA agreed to fund Army Corps, the Norfolk district, to restudy those HEC2 streams, and agreed to hold the release of our letter of final determination and the maps until the LOMARs were completed. And they agreed to do that because all of us agreed that we didn't want to have multiple map revisions issued immediately after getting new maps released. So if you get a LOMAR finished within 6 months of your letter of final determination being released, they will automatically incorporate that into the new maps so it doesn't look like you have LOMARs. At the same time, we decided that we would start our own process to update our community floodplains, because in Henrico, where FEMA floodplains stop, we keep mapping and go to at least 100 acre drainage areas. So they were done together the last time they were updated, so they match perfectly. They were not done together this time. So we wanted to update all of ours to make sure that we were tying into the new FEMA boundaries and we didn't have overlap and like completely conflicting boundaries. So then they went ahead and moved forward with the appeal period on the FEMA process. We agreed that was going to happen. Then, surprise, in October, our LFD was issued. And I remember this day vividly because I was sitting in the rocking chair putting my daughter to sleep, and I got an email that was like, hey, we mailed your LFD yesterday. Can you let us know when you get it? So completely unexpected. In September of 2023, I literally had a meeting with our entire development community telling them to expect our maps in the next year or later because the Army Corps study was still not done. So the LFD was issued, and then that meant our new maps would go effective on April 25th. So we talked to FEMA some about this, and they because we were not on their list at all, they did not have a date. Still not entirely sure how it got issued because it was not officially scheduled, but there were contract changes and things going on the FEMA side. So it seems to be maybe there was a mix up. But basically they were like, sorry, no take backs. Once it's issued, it's issued. So we had to immediately pivot and figure out how to deal with this because we were completely unprepared. So we started off with a huge number of challenges because this was quite possibly the worst time of the year that they could have issued this. So one, it was just issued unexpectedly. So we were not prepared at all to be doing outreach. I thought we would have another year at least to be doing it. So kind of just had it on the back burner. We were telling developers that maps were out. They knew it was coming. We were already using the preliminary maps. Residents and things were being made aware of it, as conversations and things would come up, but we hadn't made a real plan for dealing with this. We also had an election for our board of supervisors. So 4 of our 5 board members were up for election. 2 of them retired, so we were guaranteed to have a new board. And then the 2 of the remaining board members were not running opposed. We're running opposed. So we had a potential to get 4 new board members. We ended up with 3 new board members. So that changed everything because our previous board was pretty well versed in our floodplain program and what was going on with that. And so we had to, plan to immediately pivot and educate them. And we didn't know who would be on the board and when we could start doing that. Also, it was holiday season. So nobody was supposed to be in the office and we had fewer board meetings. And so that was difficult. Staff capacity. Caitlin and I were it for floodplains. And we are already completely inundated with plan review issues and permitting issues. We are working on our CRS application because Emily and I were trying to get it finished. We really were supposed to have it finished by the beginning of February so that we could get everything done to make it on the October list this year. We were able to push it until the beginning of March. We cut it down, I think, to the wire, but so we had a lot of issues with that. It is also our budget season. So we were not allowed to be on the agenda for meetings because everything is based on the budget from basically November to March. We also had PR changes. Our public relations team created a new position for a person dedicated to public works and public utilities. So they didn't really want to get involved in things until that person was hired. And she wasn't hired until the middle of, until we actually started this. And then they also were creating new accounts for everything, on social media and just new tools that they were using. So we were dealing with trying to navigate that while the general government accounts were all focused on the new board members, budgeting, all of that. Our IT department also decided to change the domain name for Henrico County. So we were getting new website URLs and emails. So we had to deal with that. And then they also were changing all of the servers for our website, which limited how we could edit things. So I think we had, basically everything against us in this process to be able to start it. So it's very stressful. We immediately had to pivot and, figure out how to address this. So my main goal was to make sure that we were doing inclusive and meaningful outreach. I was not here in the county when we had new maps last time. That was in 2007. But what I was told was that they notified about 10,000 property owners, and then 10,000 property owners showed up or started calling or emailing them. They had people literally wrapped around the building. And I did not want to do that because I don't have time to do that, and it's not useful anyway. So we really wanted to focus on inclusive and meaningful outreach. So the first thing that we did was create an outreach plan. So I immediately asked to enlist our consultant help, and we have been referring to ourselves as the dream team. I'm still trying to figure out how we can get shirts or something made and paid for. So we use our annual consultants. That includes Dewberry, Adkins, and Stantec. And luckily, I'm very, very grateful that we have the ability to have these consultants on staff. And I've been kind of building a really fantastic team helping me with floodplain management in general. So I immediately tapped on all of them. They all work with FEMA regularly, so there was no bringing them up to speed, and just said pretty much hey, we're building a mega team like FEMA does. We're all going to work together. We can't compete. We just all have to figure this out because there's way too much going on here. And, I don't have people to help me. So we all came together. This was really challenging though, because we did not have scopes of work necessarily in place for them to do this. We luckily had just kind of a generic staff log support scope in place for Adkins already, because they've been helping with some floodplain support with our plan review staff, kind of acting as a help desk type situation. And then we had just created one that didn't have very much money in it for Dewberry to help with a grant application. So we were able to get it started because those were generic enough that they could start billing us to that while we worked on getting new scopes of work in place. Stantec didn't have one at all though. And so they actually just ended up joining some of our meetings and didn't get paid for it because we didn't have a scope for them. The biggest challenge with this though was that because we were in the budget season and holiday season, it took forever to get these POs issued. Usually we can get it done maybe in 2 weeks, but it took forever. So they weren't even all complete until sometime in January, and we started in November. So we started creating an outreach plan. I immediately started leadership engagement. So I got the email October 26th at 8 p.m. I immediately texted all of my people oh my gosh, WTF, what is going on? I need to talk to you tomorrow morning. And then got our attorneys and county manager's office and everybody, join in so that we could talk about that, because we had to do an ordinance amendment. And in order to meet the noticing requirements for the public hearings, we were going to have to be on the agenda in February and in March. And in general, we're not allowed to be on those agendas because they are covered. The January meetings start off with swearing in the new board members and are not supposed to be very heavy. And then February and March are all budgeting. So that had to take a lot of working back and forth between that, to make sure that we could get on the agendas because we didn't have a choice. And then the property owner notifications. So I think you probably all are aware, but we are required by state code to notify all property owners impacted by a FEMA map change. So we had to figure that out and figure out how we wanted to message it to them, but we had to make sure that the board was completely up to speed and that leadership were prepared for the types of responses that we might be getting back. And then we wanted to just do general outreach as well, because it's not just the property owners that are going to be impacted by this. So we developed what we are calling a surround sound outreach approach. We are focusing on the impacted residents and businesses, but then we are using a whole bunch of methods to actually access them. So we're using direct mail for letters to the property owners, social media. We talked about radio. We haven't really done anything with radio yet. We've identified infomediaries. So these are basically just stakeholders that can help us share information. So it could be the news, it could be local community groups, church organizations, things like that. Neighborhood watches are one of them that we've got. Public meetings and webinars. We've talked about creating printed materials to take to local stores and community spaces. We haven't done that one yet. And then TV, so coordinating with the news stations and doing interviews and things like that. And then our PR department is actually going to be making some videos as well for our YouTube channel. So we started off with this like really kind of grand plan, and then for all the things that we could do, and that's what leadership asked for, was just give us everything you can come up with, and then we'll whittle it down from there of what makes sense and what doesn't. And then we, as part of this inclusive, and meaningful outreach, we wanted to make sure that the messaging was individualized. So, and this is why we did the parcel analysis that I'm going to talk about. So we broke it down into really 5 audiences that we had. We had 3 that we dubbed the increasing flood risk group, 1 in decrease and 1 in no change. So in the increasing flood risk group, we had people who were moving from a lower moderate flood risk area before into the FEMA floodplain. So people who were totally brand new, newly mapped into the floodplain for the first time. Then we had people who already had some kind of FEMA floodplain, but it was increasing in some way on their property. So that might impact a building or not. It didn't really matter. It was just if there was any kind of increase on their property from what they had before. And then there were people who were previously mapped as county floodplain, but were switching to FEMA floodplain. And so there might have been an increase in the boundary. It might have actually ended up in a decrease of the boundary overall, but because they were changing from county to FEMA, we were treating as an increase because the mandatory flood insurance purchase could get triggered. Then we had people who were moving, from the high risk flood area totally out. So those were the decrease. And then we had people that were no change because FEMA did not actually update a lot of the streams with our map updates. So we had a large number of properties that had literally no change to what they had before. So we took those audiences and then we identified some individual messaging for them around flood insurance requirements and regulatory requirements, because we have been making a big push to try to educate people on our regulatory requirements, because we just get a lot of negative feedback from the development community constantly because they're just not familiar with our rules, or they don't want to meet them, or whatever. So we wanted to make sure that that was very clear to people. And then we also included some of the buyer beware language, because that has been a huge issue, more so recently, because people just keep buying houses and aren't learning this. And then because of our higher standards, they can't do much with it. And then we wrapped all of that up into the different types of outreach that we were going to do. And I'll talk about each one of these in just a minute. So the parcel data analysis, this was our very first step, because we needed to figure out who was impacted and like what kind of effort, what level of effort we were going to actually need to put into this, because we had no concept of how many parcels were even going to be impacted. So we used FEMA's changes since last firm layer to determine the impacts, looking at if there was an increase, decrease, or no change. Then we compared all of our parcel boundaries, building footprints, that changes since last firm layer, and the floodplain boundaries, both FEMA and county. And then we ran a whole bunch of queries countywide, and then again within each magisterial district, trying to get like the most robust look at what the impacts were as possible. So we did just the initial number of parcels within each of those categories. Then we looked at the number of buildings. We looked at the number of buildings that were 600 square feet or bigger, because that's the threshold for accessory structures. We looked at all of that based on only being in the new floodplain, FEMA floodplain, versus overall. We looked at only those that were previously community floodplain into FEMA floodplain. We had, I think maybe eight different queries that we were running, so that we could just get, a complete picture of what was going on. And this was incredibly confusing because you have to word everything very specifically in GIS to make sure that you're getting the result that you want. And the changes since last firm layer is not the greatest to work with. And also a lot of properties had both an increase and a decrease. So we had to be really careful and try multiple versions of the coding that we were looking at for running these queries, because it took took us a minute to figure out what actually worked and what made sense. So just overall, we have over 121,000 parcels in the county. Just under 11,000 of those are in the SFHA total. So that includes FEMA and community. And then about 6,500 are actually within the FEMA SFHA. That's based on our new one. So then we looked at, just based on the parcels countywide, almost half of them had no change. And that was very important to me because there really should not be much of an issue from those residents. I expected that we would get some because I assume that most of them probably don't actually realize that they have floodplain on their property. But knowing that about half of the people impacted have literally no change, that was really helpful to explain to leadership and to set expectations that, we really don't expect much from this group. We're not going to focus on them too much. We're going to notify them, but nothing's changing, just status quo. But then almost half are having an increase of some kind. And so that was the big piece that we were like, okay, this is what we're going to focus on. These are the residents that we think we're going to get, the most feedback from. And then we've got this small 10% that's having a decrease, and, we probably won't hear from them. So we took all of this data and we just did a ton of different things of how we visualized it. So we made maps for leadership to show them where across the county and within each district they are. This is showing the parcels, not necessarily where the floodplain is. So some of these parcels are really large, but you can see we use the same coloring throughout everything as we did with the arrows and the equal signs. So anything in this orangish red is an increase, green is decrease, and blue is no change. So you could quickly see across the county where the bulk of the increases are, which is in the Varina district. And then we broke it down, by each district. And then we broke it down a few different ways too. So this is just looking at the impact of parcels so that we can see where it is within each district. So each board member could be prepared for what kind of feedback they might get from their residents. And then we also broke it down for the buildings over 600 square feet. We gave numbers for the total number of buildings, but we really focused in on these buildings over 600 square feet because those are the most likely to be insured buildings or have an insurance requirement. So that helped us a lot. Tuckahoe is our district that has the most flooding. It's also one of the oldest districts that we've got. There's a lot of old buildings there, and also some pretty wealthy neighborhoods as well. It's also a new board member. So we had to make sure that we got him brought up to speed because he wants to actually do door-to-door conversations and things with some of these people so that he can help prepare them and understand. We get a lot of drainage complaints from that area as well. And then same with Varina, which is on the east end. So preparing them for that. The challenges and lessons learned that we had with this. QA/QC is critical, but we should have done it at the beginning, not just at the end. I think we would have saved ourselves a lot of time and headaches if we had done it at the beginning, but we just didn't really think about it. But one of the things that we did was that we found issues with FEMA's changes since last firm layer, and we actually had to recreate the entire thing for them because it was wrong. So that was something that took us an extra week or so to deal with that. And then we were coordinating with them on it and sending it back to them so that they can update their information. Our building footprints layer wasn't comprehensive. And then we found out in the middle of doing this that our GIS department actually just had a brand new one that they were about to release. So then we had to change everything again to use that one. But we had to really think about how we wanted to deal with this because the building footprints didn't cover all of the buildings that we could see on the aerial imagery. So we knew that what we were getting wasn't going to be exact. And so we talked a lot about, was it worth the effort of going through and recreating a new building footprints layer for our GIS department that would be more accurate? And we ultimately decided no, that we didn't want to do that because we were doing a surround sound effect that we felt like we would be able to hit enough of the residents, hit them enough times that even if we missed something with the building, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. We also had parcel boundary issues because I don't know how other localities do this, but our parcel boundaries are based on the tax parcel ID, not necessarily the deeded parcel boundaries. So we might have one property owner who owns multiple deeded parcels that might be in one tax ID number. So when we were running the queries, we were finding that there might be like 3 parcels that don't even touch that are all combined as one parcel number. And so some of them aren't in the floodplain. And so that was challenging. And the GIS person that was doing the work actually wanted to go in and like, I think the real term is like blow it up so that they were all completely separate. And I had to be like, whoa, no, don't do that. Like that will complicate everything else. And everything, like every single thing in the county is based on this. It would derail everything. So we had to go back and deal with that. But definitely look at it at the beginning, not just the end. Communication is also key. These queries were incredibly confusing, trying to figure out, okay, this is increasing, but this is decreasing, and this applies, but this doesn't. And we literally spent hours going back and forth on this to the point where we had one meeting where every single one of us was confused and we all just had to say, stop. I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. Let's restart because this is so confusing. We were like drawing. So it was very, very important that we were super detailed and organized. And we had to stick with the same, 4 people doing all of it until we finished because it was too confusing to try to bring more people up to speed on it. But then because of that, the results of the parcel analysis were also confusing and very technical. And so then I had to turn around and communicate all of that back to our leadership and the public. And so I got this spreadsheet that was just insane of all of the data and from all the queries. And it took me literal days to go through it and figure out what was what. And then still had to redo it because there were just so many numbers. I like copied things over wrong and it was just super confusing. So communication was key. And I would also just say organization. And then it will always take longer than you think it will. So that applies to this whole process. But this analysis, we literally had to redo the queries at least 4 or 5 times before we got it right because something kept happening, whether it was the change since last firm or the building footprints or the parcel number issue, or just like we found out that we didn't have the language in the query quite right. And so we were getting numbers that didn't make sense. And our GIS person didn't know that because he didn't understand our ordinance. And so I had to go through everything with like a fine tooth comb and think it through, like, does this make sense? And then we were able to figure out what the issues were and go back and redo it. But it was challenging and it took a lot of time. And we did this all through December. And that ended up pushing back kind of the entire process because we couldn't move forward until we figured out what addresses were actually impacted. So moving into the outreach tools and resources, we started with the property owner notification letters. We wanted to get those out as soon as possible. And that was really the biggest thing that the parcel analysis was for. So we designed 3 different letter templates, the increase, decrease, and no change. We incorporated an image of each parcel with the floodplain boundaries into the letter. This was something that I thought of. I wasn't really sure if it would even be possible, but we were talking about how, about 50% of our impacted parcels had no change. And I was like, how do we get them to not freak out the second that they see this letter and start calling and emailing us when there's really no change? And so then I thought, what if we put an image of their parcel with the aerial imagery on it so they can see where their buildings are and the floodplain boundary so that they can see, a lot of parcels we have, it's just like a teeny tiny sliver of floodplain at the corner of their lot and not near anything. Or they might have like 100-acre parcel and there's barely any floodplain on it. So it really doesn't make that big of a difference. So we got that idea and then we had to figure out how do we actually make this happen. And we were able to, our GIS folks were able to figure out how to export images of each parcel with the floodplain boundaries shown on it as image files. And I think they used a dynamic map in GIS is how they did it. And then we named all of those files by the parcel number ID. And that was really important because we use mail merge for all of this. And so I'll explain that in just a second. Then we had to go through and simplify the letter language because we drafted a letter of all the things that we felt like we needed to cover. And I think it was like 4 or 5 pages at the beginning. And we were like, this is way too complicated and long and confusing. So we need to get it to at least front back and make it as simple as possible, but hitting the highlights. And then we created an FAQ sheet that is 4 pages total, so 2 pages front and back, that went into as many things as we could think of that would help elaborate on all the things we put in the letter. And then we printed that and mailed it with the letter itself and put it on the website. And then we ended up using Publisher to make the letters. We started off in Word, and we ended up we changed the formatting a lot to make it all fit. And so we just switched to Publisher because it was easier to manipulate for that, but you could definitely do it in Word. And then we use Mail Merge to put in, all the address information, obviously, but also the images. So I created a spreadsheet, our address spreadsheet, but then I made a separate folder for the images and created a formula. So it just pulled in the like link for where it would be without the image, and then just pulled the GPIN number over and automated all of it. So it only took like 5 minutes. And then we built that into the Mail Merge. So there were some challenges with that because Publisher functions differently than Word, which I did not know until I was in my 2 hours in of not getting it to work. And then I figured out that Publisher has a different process for images specifically. So then it was just a button. So I spent a long time wasting time figuring that out. It's very, very easy in Publisher. It is not very easy in Word. So this is what the final letter looked like. This is the decrease one. This is the no change one. And this is the increase one. And then the second page looks pretty much the same, but the messages on the second page are slightly different. So we again carried over the graphics of the arrows and the equal sign and the colors. And then we tried to use icons and things to make it as simple as possible. We bolded things. We've got their parcel numbers in it. We've got the image so they can see the floodplain. And then at the very top, we put the banner, and we changed the wording on that banner multiple times. At first it said like Henrico County flood maps are changing. And then our leadership asked us to change it to put FEMA flood maps first, because they wanted to make it clear that we don't necessarily have control over this change, because we knew that everyone, probably everyone is going to be annoyed or upset or in some way unhappy about this change. And so they wanted to try to kind of set that expectation clearly from the beginning, that this is not necessarily something that we personally did. It is a FEMA change and we are implementing it. We also set up a help desk, which I'll talk about in a minute. So we put all of that information on the letters as well. So then we had to figure out how to actually print and mail all of these letters, because we had about 6,500 parcels impacted, but then we were trying to figure out, how do we deal with renters? We didn't have any data on renters. So what we settled on doing was identifying all of the parcels that had a different physical address from their mailing address. And then all of those were duplicated. And then we filtered out all of that and cleaned it up to find the ones that only had real street addresses, because if they didn't have a building, they don't have a real street address. So we cleared all of that out. And then we ended up with about 9,000 some parcels that we were going to actually mail letters to. And so we have a mail room at the county who does this for some things. And we asked them and they said they wouldn't do it if it was more than 1,000 letters. And then we were trying to figure out, well, what does utilities do when they send out bills? What does the tax assessor's office do? We could never get a clear answer on this. And so our mail room recommended that we use a company that I don't know, apparently people at the county had used before. So we spent weeks going back and forth with them on this because we had to find someone who was a mail house, not just a printer, because we did not want to have to stuff 9,000 envelopes ourselves and mail them. So we had a printer already on contract, but none of them would do the mailing piece of it. So our mailroom recommended a company to do that. We went back and forth with them for weeks, literally got down to the last day with the final quote. And then we switched to this company called Linemark. And they figured out everything in like a day and they were wonderful. So strongly recommend them if you need a mail house. But we talked to them about using informed delivery and tracking and like what our options were. We ended up having to change the plan because we switched at the final hour. We didn't have as much time to do what we were going to do with tracking. So informed delivery, if you're not familiar with it, is you can sign up for an email now from the post office that like gives you a list of whatever mail is going to be in your mailbox and an image of the letters and things like that. So they said that we could actually free of charge add messaging and like an image and stuff to that would say something about the map updates, so that when they saw the image of the letter of the envelope, they would get some other like graphic and things too. And so we were going to do that. But then because of the timing, we wanted to get everything mailed within 2 to 3 days, basically, of like getting them to print it. We didn't have enough time for that. So instead we settled on just printing it on the envelope itself, so that when people saw it, hopefully they would not just see a letter from the county and, you know, throw it away, that they would actually open it. And then for tracking purposes, we didn't end up doing it, but they had a way where we could track. It's like invisible ink that they print on the letters, and it would track when things were being sent and delivered and all of that. And I think there wasn't, the postage was actually cheaper for that option, but the mailings were not guaranteed. The timing was like up to 2 or 3 weeks or something. And so they told us it would most likely be delivered within 3 to 5 days because everything was local, but we chose to not take that option because we wanted the guaranteed 2 to 3 days because things had been already delayed for so long. One of the things that we learned though about this is that postage is very expensive. And especially since we weren't trying to do this with like tax assessed bills and things like that. Our director actually wanted us to send certified mail to everyone that had an increase, because we still get people from the 2007 maps that say they didn't know about it. And we figured out the cost of that. I mean, a certified letter is like $5 a piece. So it was going to be tens of thousands of dollars to do this. And we just decided, we made the executive decision and told them we weren't doing it, because I was like, this is stupid to spend that much money on postage when we're doing all these other things. Like if we were only sending a letter, maybe. So we didn't do certified mail, but it was still really expensive. And so part of the reason why we switched companies at the end was that the fee they were charging us for printing and mailing was really high. And we ended up saving almost $10,000 by switching companies. So we sent about 9 or 10,000 letters. So the printing costs of the letters, which were 2 pages, plus the FAQ, which was 4 pages, and we had them print it like a folding like brochure thing. All of that, and then the envelopes, and then the mailing it guaranteed in 2 to 3 days, which charged the regular stamp. So I think it's like $68. It ended up being like $10,000, I think. So the other company was quoting us at 18 to 20,000, but it's still very expensive. And then we ran into issues with procurement requirements, because none of these companies are a consultant, you know, a contractor with the county. And if anything is over $10,000, you have to go through the whole like RFQ process. And so we didn't want to deal with that. And we had in our scope of work with Dewberry other direct costs already in there, but we only had $5,000. So we ended up just doing a change order. And so they're paying for everything under their scope of work and then billing us for it, because that was the only way we could actually pay for postage. So that's one of our lessons learned too, is to like increase the ODCs significantly in the future if we know we're going to be printing things. So again, I think I talked about all of these. So we did stand up a help desk. This was something that we wanted to do because we knew we were going to be getting a bunch of questions, and I don't have time to respond to 9,000 people asking questions. So we created this help desk. It has special phone numbers, an email, and an online form. We coordinated with the dream team. We set up this whole SOP. That's what this workflow looks like. We created a tracking sheet on our SharePoint site so we can keep track of everything. And we basically created a whole plan for this between myself and the consultants of how we're going to handle questions. So we have the FAQ. So we have one point person who is answering all of the calls and emails and online form inquiries. And she speaks both English and Spanish. So, and we did that on purpose. So if people could call in that spoke Spanish, she could go ahead and talk to them. And then she either answers the question if it's something from the FAQ that she can answer, or if it's just like looking up the property, see if they're in the floodplain, or she will route it accordingly. So Atkins was designated as our kind of go-to group for regulatory type questions because they're already very in the weeds of our ordinance, helping with other things. Stantec was set up to answer mapping questions because they actually did the maps and modeling for FEMA for this study. And then DuBarry was kind of going to answer other general outreach insurance type questions, or everything comes to me depending on what it is. So Teresa manages all of that. And then the SharePoint tracker has a bunch of different flags and things in it so we can see where everything is. It's got the questions we're getting, an overview of the answer, the types of inquiries, you know, like where it's coming from, if it was sent to a subject matter expert, all of that. And then we've got a whole process for how we actually respond to people so that the consultants aren't really the ones coordinating with them. We created Henrico County emails for all of them so that if we did need to coordinate, it's coming from a Henrico County account and not a DuBarry, Atkins, or Stantec account. And then we, you know, stood up this flood Henrico email, and we set up an auto response on it so that it will say like, thanks for contacting the help desk. We'll get back to you within 2 business days and things like that. And then we created this little graphic that we're putting on our email signature that has the help desk information on it as well. Then we updated our website. So we again just carried over the graphics for this so that users, if they got the letter, they could come in and very quickly find what they need to look at and not have to filter through a bunch of information. And then we put a banner just on our main page. So we had to coordinate with IT a lot on this to make sure that everything was done. And then they were changing the servers, which changed how we handled accounts. And so we had to create new accounts in the middle of it and just all the things. And then they decided, because they were changing the domain name, we had them go ahead and fix it so everything would forward. Right now our website is .us. They were switching it to .gov. And so we agreed that they would set up everything to go ahead and forward the .gov to the .us option and vice versa, so that we would print everything using .gov so that we wouldn't have any like different messaging and things in the middle of this process. And then after we finalized everything, they decided to postpone it. So now all of our printed documents say .gov and they're not changing it. I don't know when it's been postponed indefinitely, apparently. So that was fun. Then we created social media, like a toolkit, and we're doing intermediary outreach. So we are sending emails to all these different intermediaries that we identified. So we started with the insurance, lender, and realtor contact list that we created for CRS. And then we also coordinated with our PR department and like emergency management, police, to get community organizations, religious organizations, like neighborhood watches, things like that, so that we can email them all. We have these emails that we wrote that are specific to each one of them, that basically says like, maps are changing. Please help us share this information with your network. And then we created a whole bunch of different graphics. These are just a few of them for social media, and went ahead and scripted messages. So it's similar to what we started at DCR for Flood Awareness Week, and they've continued. It's just specific to this. And then the email signature graphic I mentioned, we're sending that out as well to the intermediaries so that they can use it if they'd like. Then we're also doing meetings and some door-to-door outreach. And this is one of the other, I think, cool things that we're doing. So we decided overall with leadership that we were not going to do individual meetings in each magisterial district with the board members, because the impacts were very different. We have a new board, and it's not, you know, it's a FEMA map update. So there's not really anything that the board members can say to make the residents happy necessarily if they're mad about this. So we all agreed that we would just do one countywide overview webinar that we would record and put on the website, which we were hoping to do during Flood Awareness Week, but is now pushed for, I think, 2 weeks from now. So it's going to be just like an hour, if that, very, very high level, explaining what's going on and all the resources and things that we have. Then we're scheduling in-person open houses and some door-to-door efforts, and we're coordinating with our emergency management group on this because we might use the CERT team to help us with actually implementing the door-to-door efforts. But once we get like, we got down into the weeds of where we're going, and I don't think we're gonna have enough properties to make it worth their time to help us. But that is one resource that we've been tapping into in case we need it. We based all of this on demographic data, and I'll talk about that more in just a second. But for the open houses and the door-to-door, we are identifying priority areas of where we want to do that. And the things that we were looking at were if the flood risk was increasing, if there were households with no internet access, households without a car, and income inequality and unemployment. So we were looking at these specifically because we're doing an online webinar. So if people don't have internet access, they're not going to, they're most likely not going to be able to see that. And then if we're doing open houses and people don't have a car, they're not going to be able to get to our meeting. And we are looking at locations that are also on bus routes and things like that, but we still wanted, we wanted to make sure that we are looking at that information. So these are just a few of the maps from our demographic data dashboard. So we created a dashboard, like an Esri dashboard with all of the census data. We pulled in social vulnerability data, all of our flood risk data that we created from the parcel analysis, and some different things like broadband access, all of that. And then we overlaid everything and we just started going through it. And Ashley Gordon, who I know you all know, is with Dewberry Now, did the bulk of this, and she did a wonderful job filtering out to try to figure out like what makes the most sense, because we were trying to figure out where do we need to go in person? Where are where's the population that doesn't speak English as their first language, because those need to be door to door so we can provide translated materials instead of doing an open house. Where are the people that don't have cars or internet, because then we need to be on the bus route, or we need to do door to door, or we need to, like have multiple open houses on the ground so that people can access. So we pulled all this together. It's pretty manual right now of just like going back and forth through it, but we were planning to do something along this lines for our acquisition program. And so we took this basically as a starting point, and we're going to build off of it and turn it into something more that hopefully that will like be a little bit more automatic, so that we don't have to like filter through everything each time. And then this is just an example of one of the priority areas that we identified where we want to do the door-to-door and in-person meetings. And so this was our initial like deep dive into it. And then Ashley went further into that, because my question after this was then, where are the buildings actually at? We started off with a higher level. There were actually multiple places that they found based on just the parcel data. And then we had a conversation, with the more local knowledge of what's going on. Like there was one that was this huge mobile home park that Ashley had flagged and was like, we need to go do this one. And then I was like, no, we don't, because it's this gigantic parcel and there's like an inch of female floodplain on it. And it's in the corner, not near any of them. So we're not going to go door to door in this mobile home park, because none of them are actually in the floodplain. So we had those conversations to then narrow it down again. And so then after we did all of this, then she took that data and started digging in with the building footprints and looking at all of it. And so that's where we are right now, is figuring out how many buildings there actually are. And now we're working on routes. So we can figure out, do we need to enlist emergency management or other people to help us with the door-to-door? Can we do it ourselves? Can we do it in a weekend? Like how much time do we need? And then we're looking at locations right now. We identified multiple locations for each priority area where we could hold the meeting. And now we're just trying to figure out, like, between the libraries and schools, the process for doing all of that. And then we also are offering translation and interpretation services. So this was a big thing. We have a lot of different languages that are spoken in Henrico County. So I mentioned earlier, our help desk staff is fluent in both English and Spanish, but we also translated materials into the top 15 languages in the county, which includes English. So our FAQ, we translated, the help desk online form we translated, and then we are creating a door knocker for the door-to-door outreach that is getting translated. We're still trying to figure out how to make that work. And then we set up a separate phone line for interpretation services. So we have a contract with a company called ULG. I would check within your locality. If you're not sure, you might have them also. Ours is, I think it really is supposed to be more for like police, but it's kind of turned into more of like a PR countywide. Any of us can tap into it. And so they've done this for some other large efforts like our drainage bond, and other bond efforts. They've translated documents. So we coordinated with our PR department to figure out the process for this, and how to do that. And so we translated the FAQ. What we decided that would be the main document that we would translate. Our website is set up to where you can just toggle languages and it will automatically translate for you. We thought the online form would do that as well because it has the toggle to choose the languages, but it doesn't actually do that. And then for the separate phone line, the way our contract is set up, we have to be the ones that call ULG for the interpreter. So our residents can't just call them directly. They have that option, but you have to pay more, so we didn't have a contract separate. So we have 2 lines. So I have 3 phones right now. One is in a totally different person's office, just on like silent right now, and he's not allowed to touch it. And then the others are in my office. And so we're still trying to figure out the best way to deal with the interpretation services. Our online form has a request to pick the language and schedule it. And then we are kind of setting aside time where we'll just be available to coordinate. So we basically have to do a 3-way call to pull in the interpreter, and have them talk about things. Then we also were trying to figure out how we were going to actually measure success from this entire effort, because it is not like, probably no one's going to be happy about this. And so that was something that we had to set the expectation with leadership on from the beginning, was like, people are going to be unhappy. This is a huge impact on them, especially if they're getting required to carry flood insurance. This can have significant impacts on their lives. And so we need to be prepared, and our board members need to be prepared for people to be very upset. And that is not an indicator of if our outreach was successful or not. If they're very upset that, Henrico County employees did a terrible job, then that's one thing. But if they're just upset about the map change itself, that is not an indicator of whether or not this project was successful. So we identified some potential measures for the various tactics that we were doing, and we're going to just kind of keep track of all of these things. And then at the end, go back through and figure out, like, how does that work? And then, so I'll just kind of wrap it up. These were kind of the overarching lessons learned. Just set expectations early and be prepared to adapt. We had to pivot and change our plans almost every week. QC is critical. You're never going to make everybody happy. So don't let that stop you from going on. I'll add some other things too that I mentioned throughout, but this is incredibly difficult, and we really wanted to make this as inclusive as possible. And it is so expensive to do this. And so that was one of the things that we've talked about a lot, is like, this is not realistic for some localities to do this. And we're still not doing a great job. Like, the translation piece of it and the interpretation piece of it is very difficult. We could have the ability to have interpreters at individual meetings, but it's like crazy expensive to do that. And then we also don't know what languages we would need. But just getting the FAQ translated into into 14 languages was over $10,000. Translating the online form, which was only like a couple pages of basic text for the questions, was still like $1,500 or something. So, and that's not even factoring in how much it will cost us when we actually use the phone calls for interpreting it, and just the amount of time and things that's going to take. So, the mailing and printing, all of that is expensive. The amount of time we've spent on this is crazy. This support we've gotten from consultants, not everybody's going to have that, and it is expensive too. And so we're very fortunate that we have the money and resources and the support to do that, but it is hard. And then we have also found so many issues with the FEMA data that is not even specific to this, that we are dealing with from, our flood risk models are missing things, or sorry, our flood risk products are missing things because they forgot to incorporate a LOMAR into it. So that's part of why the changes since last firm layer was wrong. So that's wrong. Our streamline layer is wrong. Like just all kinds of issues. So now we're having to fix those things and get back with FEMA to talk to them about how to get them to update all of their data on their website to actually have correct files and things on it. And now we're getting all of our, inquiries are starting to pick up because everybody's gotten their letters. And so we've gotten, I think, over 60 inquiries to the help desk now. And we're getting all kinds of things. A lot of them are just, hey, am I in the floodplain? But like we have people who are complaining because they were removed from the floodplain. So they're mad about that and want to go appeal to FEMA that they should be added back into the floodplain. Then we have people who, the typical ones are mad that they're in the floodplain. So we've got, a whole range of inquiries coming in. We've got people now asking for property acquisitions. We've got a lot going on. We've got people asking about the community floodplains now. So we're, managing all of that. So it is a lot. I will just leave it at that. So that's what I have. I think we'll have more lessons learned and things by the time we finish this. We are continuing our outreach. So our new maps go into effect April 25th. We are continuing outreach at least through the end of May to make sure, anyone that has flood insurance requirements applied for the first time, they'll have 30 days to get that policy. So we're going to push our outreach through the end of May to cover those 30 days. Our ordinance was adopted last night, thankfully, so that piece is done. But yeah, so we'll keep going. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I guess I have.
Okay. Does anybody here in the room have any questions before we turn it over to folks virtually attending?
Yeah, Kristen, in York County, when we got our maps updated in January 2015. I'm just curious, does FEMA, I know back then, after we got our preliminary maps, FEMA staff came down and we held a big public meeting at a library for people to come and ask questions. Does FEMA offer that anymore?
They did not host any meetings like that for us. So we did, we had the FRR meeting and the CCO meeting virtually, which was just like for staff. They did not offer to have any public meetings with us. And then once we kind of got into everything, we didn't really want them to do it either because I'm still pretty mad that they issued our LFD without telling us. We did coordinate with Bill Bradfield, our insurance specialist, about, so I sent him some of the letter language that we used, and he sent some of the updated flyers and things about insurance. And we talked about maybe doing something joint with him to answer insurance questions. But our schedules were really hard to coordinate. And then we ultimately decided that we felt like it wasn't really worth it, because I was thinking of the insurance roundtables that we did. And I don't remember if you were at the one we did at HRPDC a few years ago when FEMA was there, and Ben, I'm sure you remember, they were there to answer insurance questions, but people sometimes ended up getting more annoyed because they wanted to get questions about the quote for their insurance policy. And those are not things that FEMA can necessarily tell them. And so we talked about pulling in an insurance agent that's on our PPI committee, maybe, or just pushing them to the insurance agents. And that's why we pulled the insurance agents also into our contact list to try to get them to push some of this out. But they did not offer to.
Yeah, and I do remember when we had that back in 2000. It was probably in 2014 when we actually had that meeting. We were surprised at how many people showed up. It was good.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how many people show up to our in-person meetings. Right now, we're trying to figure out the best way to schedule it. We'll probably have multiple meetings per location. So a morning, an evening, or a weekday, weekend. So it's still for that area. And then we also decided that we would market it countywide. So even though we're targeting this one kind of neighborhood, because of the demographic data, anyone is welcome, and we're going to just notice all of them so that anybody can come if they want to.
One other question, Kristen, you mentioned an SOP, that y'all developed an SOP. What was that for?
The SOP was for the help desk and how all of our consultants and myself would coordinate together and how we would respond to messages. So it outlines, like, depending on an email, phone call, or online form inquiry, how we process that, how it gets tracked in the tracker. If we're emailing it to we're calling it our subject matter expert email. So we've got like email subject lines outlined so we can filter things in our emails so we don't miss things. So it's got all of that, and then like how we respond just in general to messages. So we created some template, like boilerplate responses, because that was something else that is very important right now and kind of a hot topic, is how we respond to the community, because we've gotten some feedback, not necessarily from floodplains, but just in general with the county, that like with development projects that sometimes responses come across as cold, and we need to be like more friendly and helpful in things. So that was something I've talked a lot with our consultants about, because they're not familiar with local government and all of these like nuances. Sometimes they write a response that they think is fine because it's just like kind of to the point, and but it doesn't really work for what we've been dealing with. So all of that is in the SOP.
Okay, does anybody else virtually have any questions? If you do, feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. If not, thank you, Kristen, for your presentation. It was extremely thorough. It's incredible what you guys are doing at Henrico to make sure that your community is informed. It's the most comprehensive outreach campaign that I've ever heard of, and I can see why it's so expensive. I can tell that you've worked really hard, and your team is going to be making sure that folks know what's coming and how they can best be prepared. So thank you for sharing that, and I hope that you'll be willing to share your presentation with us so I can send it out to the work group.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Thanks. And I'm happy to share any of our materials and things with y'all too, if anybody wants it, like the graphics we made, the letters, you know, I can give you the publisher version of the letters if you want, you know, whatever, just let me know.
Okay, I think we would love to host the information on our website, the CRS Workgroup website, so that people can call back to it when it's relevant for them and they're going through flood map updates. At last meeting in January, there were actually many communities that reported they're anticipating flood map updates this year. So when it's timely for them, I'm sure that resource being handy would be immensely valuable. So thank you, Kristen.
Yep, thanks.
We have a little bit more time in the meeting than I anticipated. Ben, did you want to speak about the progress that you guys have made?
Give me a second to. You think I can show some slides?
Would you like to?
I would love to.
Okay.
If I can find a photo drive.
You're welcome to email it to me if you got it.
Yeah, that's fine too.
Okay.
Do that.
So I'm giving you guys Nancy's in the email inbox. So. Has anybody ever heard of Inbox Zero? Ian has introduced this concept to Wetlands Watch and revolutionized our work life by equipping us with so many filters on our emails that we are organized. And there is no massive bulk of emails just unorganized in our inboxes anymore. So if you're interested in getting organized in your emails, I recommend looking it up. Ian filmed a tutorial for us on how to install it, and it was so valuable. I hope that you guys have someone in your lives that can help you be organized in that way. Did you send it, Ben?
I did. Did you
Okay.
get it? Not yet. It's in a folder because you have your inbox zero thing going on.
Yeah. Didn't get it.
Is it in your spam filter?
Oh, CRS Workgroup.
Hey, there we go.
Yeah.
All right.
Is it a Google or is it PowerPoint?
PowerPoint.
Okay. Do you think it'll work in Google Slides?
Maybe.
Okay.
So
Switch
Yes,
to
can-
sharing.
thank you, Savannah. So I'll try to be quick because nobody hates having a meeting is a little bit earlier, right? Can you guys online, you can hear me, right? Thanks. So so this is a project that we've been working on. Thank you. With AMT, mentioned at a few of these meetings previously, we got a grant from the Community Flood Preparedness Fund to look at how we can, at the HRPDC, support local participation in the community rating system. And so, you know, why we're here, a lot of us are, a lot of you all in our region are heavy hitters when it comes to getting credit in the CRS. We're trying to figure out, are there things that we can do regionally to support that work, or are there things that we can do by combining efforts? And so one of the screen sharing is paused. What's that?
Resume, the green, resume share.
There we go.
Is it working? It's not working. Let's see what they said in the chat. They're just still loading. Let's just retry.
Technical difficulties.
Okay, can everybody let us know if they're able to see this?
Okay.
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. So, again, so what we're trying to do with this effort is to kind of see what are the options out there, what are the things that we can do at the HRPDC to support localities. And one of the things that we've been interested in looking at for a while now is this idea of a regional program for public information. And so one of the things that I've been working with AMT on is with this, Jenny Sneed and Mary Simmons from AMT are on the call right now. So a lot of this work, credit to them for doing a lot of great work with us on this project. Wanted to get a sense of kind of what's being done around the country when it comes to working multi-jurisdictionally on the CRS and on programs for public information. And so set up and had a bunch of interviews with different stakeholder, different groups from around the country, different types of groups, like governmental, non-governmental, one county, multiple towns, you know, we're here in Virginia where we have independent cities, but also, you know, some other organizations as well. So just want to talk a little bit about what we found. Just a little bit of kind of background. I think, you know, for those of you that aren't familiar with the PPI, it's something that's in the CRS manual. It's a way to kind of get additional points, the whole process laid out for what you have to do to actually get one approved. But, you know, again, you don't get points for it, but it does give a multiplier for things like outreach projects and flood response preparation. So that's one of the reasons why we're interested in it. There are the standard kind of model is to have a community PPI. So you have at least 5 people. You got to have different types of representatives. You have at least one person from floodplain management, at least one person from public information office, and then at least half of the people on that committee have to be from outside your local government. Has to meet twice a year. There is a regional option, but it's not as common as some of just the one locality options. The regional level, you have to have at least 2 reps from each community. There's a pretty strong participation requirement for both of these models. And so, you know, when you have 5 people or more from a locality, that you have larger numbers, you're more likely to hit that kind of quorum to count the meetings. At the regional level, I would say I don't think the manual is written particularly well when it comes to specifying what the requirement is, but getting participation from each community that's trying to be a part of the PPI at a regional scale might be a bit of an issue. So that's kind of where we started. And then thinking about just general takeaways of kind of like how you would think about what's going on at the individual community level and then the regional level. You know, at the individual level, community level, you've got your individual projects, you've got your own local websites, different mailing campaigns that you use, training that you do for staff, for others, and then just like kind of working internally with different departments, right? So if we think about that at the regional level, there are synergies out there. There are things that we can do at scale where, the benefits of scaling something up outweigh the additional costs in doing so. And that works in the reverse as well. So things like coming up with common templates for outreach efforts, which we've already done to some extent a few times, having one website that might host information for multiple communities, doing regional mailing campaigns, coming up with groups like this to help support training, but also we have a coastal resiliency committee and work group at the PDC, and then other PDCs in coastal Virginia have similar organizations right now. And then really kind of benefiting from being able to talk to each other and learn from what works in different communities. And I think it's really great to see that happen with this user group, because it used to be much more of a Hampton Roads focus, and then it expanded up. We got some folks from the Eastern Shore, and now we're even going, west to Richmond, and even further west. So it's really been good to have those kind of perspectives to be a part of this process. So the first or one of the places that we talked to was the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension. Some of you on the call may remember Shannon Holst. She's running this program up there. It's one county, but the county there's no unincorporated parts of the county, split up into a bunch of different towns. And so they have a very robust participation in the CRS, but in terms of what they're doing regionally she's really kind of supporting what they do. There's a little bit of work to do direct support. They don't have a regional PPI there. They do have a regional website, but so that's just, one of we have, a couple of good ideas that came out of it. One I thought was to better engage so Massachusetts Sea Grant. They have a very robust kind of work program around resilience. That's not something that we have in Virginia, but certainly something that I'm going to be bringing on with our colleagues over at Virginia Sea Grant to see if that can be something they can add to what they're doing already. In New Orleans, there is a group down there that does have a regional PPI. This is done through our work with a part of the University of New Orleans, their Center for Hazards Assessment and Responsive Technology. They have a website. It seems to have some issues. I couldn't access it this morning without trying to look at it. But it is something where, where they're trying to, maintain, get people to actually kind of participate in these meetings. They do have a much broader focus on training and education, which seems to be more of an emphasis than their program for public information. Moving west, over in the riverine communities in Illinois, there's another group there called the Illinois Valley Flood Resilience Alliance. This group meets twice a year. They don't have much of a regional focus when it comes to their PPI. They do have some individuals there. Again, it's something where they do a little bit of work to kind of do a little bit of support to their individual localities, and they try to encourage participation in the CRS. But it's something that they've had a hard time kind of maintaining over time. Down in Florida, in Nellis County, there is a very robust participation. Down, I think, Florida in general has pretty robust participation in the CRS. This group here seems to have figured out a way. This is one county working with all the different communities within that county. They do have a regional PPI. One of the things that they've done down there, they have a very robust regional mapping information service. And they also use Forerunner to help them maintain their elevation certificates. So that's something that we've kind of seen. So a few of them, they've been running to them to different conferences over the years. It's a product that they use to kind of help document and maintain elevation certificates. I think at least one community here in Hampton Roads uses it. So that's something, we haven't really looked into that in detail ourselves at PDC. We do have our own kind of elevation certificate database, but something that we haven't, tried to tackle is whether or not we want to spend a lot of money to get a product like that. But that's another question for our locality to think about whether or not we want to consider going down that road regionally. Here this is the Quad Cities. So this is Iowa and Illinois. Again, they have a bunch of communities that participate in this. They do have a regional PPI. It doesn't appear to be covering their entire region. They do have some, opportunity for them to kind of trade best practices. but it's not quite as robust as some of the other programs that we've seen. And then we also, in addition to those communities that we reached out to, touch base with ISO, just to kind of get their perspective on it. Had some insight in terms of data products that are out there, just some advice on how to do, a regional PPI, or what are the kind of the things that are most suited to doing a regional PPI, mailings, information, that kind of thing. And then thinking about, how can we put that information out there? Are there websites that we can put together, websites that we can already use? Regional, like thinking about like places, like physical spaces in the community to put information into. One thing that they did mention, you have to show that individual involvement by communities in order for the communities to get credit. We're not going to be the ones getting the credit for having a regional PPI, you are. And so in order for that to work, each community would actually have to show up and participate in the meetings. And then, we also had a chat with Wetlands Watch. Would be remiss if we didn't. Had some interesting thoughts there on kind of what's been done already in the region, where are some opportunities to go further with that. Also, I really miss having so many people here in the room. So for you all that are online right now, we used to have robust participation here in person. You guys should come back and do it in person again. Again, these are just like kind of the things that we've looked at or that have been done regionally, some opportunities there on the right in terms of thinking about brochures or other messaging, thinking about how do we track this. These are all the kind of questions that we're thinking about right now. And again, the goal with this is to really think about kind of what we can do moving forward as a region. Do we want to, put in place something official like this? Do we want to instead focus on developing these individual products and just handing them off to communities that may already have their PPI already set up? We don't want to duplicate effort. We do want to kind of make things a little bit more convenient and easier for our communities, and then to be able to offer that insight to our other regional colleagues as well throughout coastal Virginia. So just a few things that we're currently thinking about right now. We're going to be putting this all together in a report and bringing it back to this group for discussion, but also with our Coastal Resilience Committee, which drives our Coastal Resilience program at the PDC. Thinking about, again, this PPI concept at the regional level, what would it really mean? How would it work? We do have our regional elevation certificate database. That's actually Emma Corbett from our staff is working on updating that right now. A few of you have probably already received information from her or emails and have provided some of that information back to her. So thanks for that. Thinking about where we can put some of this information, we've developed through our Get Flood Fluent program a number of different brochures and other handouts. The idea behind this is really we give them to the localities and they're able to kind of put their own kind of content information on them. But we're always looking at new ones that we can do to kind of improve not just the quality of the information, but also the number of messages that we're putting out. And then just thinking about kind of how do we fund this moving forward, and then how do we track it? We don't actually have a really robust tracking mechanism in place for these outreach efforts that we're helping with. And so thinking about kind of, what do we need to do to make sure that we're getting that information from our localities to know kind of when they're using what, which things they're most benefiting from, which things are not as much. And we've done a little bit of that kind of ad hoc over the years. Some of you may remember when we put a message in the HRSD bills, the return on investment for that was not very high. For example, people got points for it, but the number of people that actually read those messages is very, very low relative to the number of people that actually get those bills. So thinking about kind of what can we best do with the resources we have to kind of maximize the credit that you all are getting for participating in the CRS. So again, these are just the things that we're thinking about right now. I wanted to give you all a status report. We have finished we finally finished tweaking our locality staff survey. So you'll be getting an email about that in the next few days, hopefully. And we would really appreciate any insight you might have on what you think would be useful from us, what things we can do regionally to support your participation in the community rating system. And yeah, so are there any questions? Again, this is something that's ongoing right now, the project. It's going to wrap up in the next 3 or 4 months or so. Jenny and Mary, that's not all on you, that's also on us. So that's our timeline internally. Jenny and Mary, anything you think we should add? Did I miss anything? I think that's the last slide.
No, Ben, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. No, I think you covered it all very well. That's just where we are right now. We're waiting for the feedback from the communities to see, which way to take the project in terms of any implementation now that the research is finished.
Any comments or questions, thoughts from localities? Right. Okay. Well, we'll be in touch. We'll have more information soon. Again, the survey will be going out for our localities. If other communities in Virginia happen to get that survey, feel free to fill it out. I just may not pay too much attention to what you write. That's a joke for everybody.
I didn't know if you wanted to check with Emily while she's on the call to see if there was any recommendations she had. Emily Schmidt, our CRS specialist, I didn't know if there was any groups that maintain regional programs that she might be able to add.
Yeah, Emily, if you have any thoughts, I know we talked to you as part of this process already, but if you had any additional comments or advice you might want to throw out there while we have you, Captain.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great summary. I really appreciate you pulling all this together. I think we covered most of what I would have ready as a current response right now during our focus call with your team. But if there's ever any additional information, I will let you know. And I look forward to seeing what you guys do in the Virginia regional areas.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so we're not wedded to doing like the full PPI on a regional scale. I think a number of our communities already have those set up, but if there are some of these different things that we can do to like provide, either a common website, that's I think we're most likely to head. But if a regional PPI makes sense, then that's I think something that we're happy to also consider. So for our localities, really appreciate any input you can provide as part of the survey. And if you have any other thoughts or questions, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Ben. Glad that we were able to squeeze that in. That was a lot of information.
Yeah, and thanks again to A&T for helping us out with this project.
Alyssa, you said Norfolk does what? Sorry, I just saw your comment in the chat.
Oh, I was just saying when Ben mentioned like that one of the communities in Virginia uses the Forerunner elevation. I was like, oh, that's us.
Awesome.
So far, it's been pretty good. I think we haven't gone through our CRS, I guess, annual visit since we've had Forerunner. So we'll see how well their elevation tracking does, I think. But I mean, it seems really helpful. They like point out specific for any elevation certificates you have, any specific areas that might have issues, and it gives you recommendations. So it's really good for checking that, especially since it's such a big requirement for CRS.
And is it doing well with migrating to the new elevation certificate template? I know there was a lot of localities that had a learning curve. I didn't know Forerunner had kept up with it as well.
Yeah, I think they have kept up with that. They're really good with technology, much better than me. I think they keep up with all of that kind of stuff. So it's been really useful. You can, it's like site specific. So we also have been able to upload a lot of other stuff into that site that like if we have written a flood zone determination letter for the property, or if there's a letter of map amendment or something on that property, we've been working on getting all those uploaded so that hopefully eventually that will be the website we go to. You can also track if someone calls about a property, and you can and we can write a note so that the next person who checks on it like if it's me or Tristan can see, oh, we talked to them about this issue at this property. So it's really cool software, though I do believe it's quite expensive.
Yes, it was tested at a locality I've worked for in the past, and it was too expensive for us to continue using beyond that initial demo period. But I'm really glad that it's something that works for your locality. And it's cool that it can generate those logs at the end of the year, so you're not stuck running around trying to pull together that information from different staff people doing the same kind of calls. So thank you for sharing. Calling back to Kristen, actually, I had a question come to mind after you finished speaking. If you're still tuned in, cool. Have you heard from Emily how this outreach campaign could be scored? I understand it's not an annual event, but is there any way for it to be credited or acknowledged in your scoring?
I don't know. We didn't talk about it because we already did our PPIs. We already had everything outlined for outreach. And honestly, Emily and I were just like trying to get through closing out our report. I was like, we cannot talk about anything else because I feel like we barely survived it. So I don't know. I don't know I would think it could probably count as some kind of like general outreach or something, but it's not annual. So
it's not annual. And so because it's not a repetitive outreach, it does not get credited in the CRS program. The outreach that happens per flood map update, unless you are doing annual updates to your flood maps, this is not something that gets credited in CRS because it is part of the minimums of you have flood maps, you have your outreach for the flood maps. Some communities do a fantastic focused job and some communities do the bare minimum, but it's not something that has a creditable bucket activity or element in the CRS program at this time because it is not something that happens repeatedly. We love to see it, and I wish there was somewhere we could credit for it. But because it's not an annual recurring something that we could say on the annual recertification, did you do this again this year? That's not something you're going to ever say yes to.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought, Emily, but with the staff devoted to it and the budget that it costs, it would be great if it was something that could be acknowledged. But there's not a regular cadence, and some communities go decades without getting their flood maps updated. So it's not necessarily something that would be accessible to many folks.
Yeah, so Savannah, one thing I didn't talk about that was part of our outreach plan was we've been having a lot of conversations about increasing outreach in general around drainage and flooding, but we've kind of been put on hold while we were waiting for PR to figure out like that they were creating a position just for us. Well, not just for us. I wish it was just for me, but for DPW and DPU. So we created like this silly graphic to try to explain like our goals. So this is really planned to be like the kickoff of our outreach, and then it will kind of ebb and flow. So the goal is that we never stop conducting outreach about the floodplain maps so that the next go around, we don't really have to do this much, that we can just be like, hey, you all already know you're in the floodplain and you know everything you need to know. Like there's a new one. So we're going to just kind of like keep, like our goal is at a minimum, we have one message a month going out anywhere about floodplains or drainage, flooding, whatever, it could be anything under our umbrella. And then hitting like increasing things for like hurricane season or flood awareness week or the acquisition program or the county maps or CRS or whatever we're doing. So that people are just constantly like being reminded, but not being overloaded with stuff. So that will tie into our CRS outreach sort of like, so it's kind of tying in that way, I guess, with that.
Yeah, that does make sense. And also I'm sure a lot of the resources and tools that you developed as part of this initial outreach can be utilized in your annual campaigns, like maybe the letters that you were able to code and set up those mechanisms for it to have the maps present. Could be incorporated in your annual mailings, for example. Not
Yeah,
to say
and
you have to do that every year, just,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we also spent a lot of time thinking about the wording on some of the graphics and things that we made. So some of them say outright like FEMA maps are changing April 25th, but a lot of them just say like, do you know your flood risk, or Henrico's flood risk is changing? And we did that on purpose because we're gonna have new county floodplain maps in the spring, and then we're gonna repeat basically a similar process. And so we're gonna just be reusing all of this stuff so that we can just go in and like edit something, and then so Dewberry had a graphic designer who created a lot of the things for us in the Adobe Creative Suite, which I'm not allowed to have access to, but our PR department does. And so I get those files. So then like we can continue that on internally. So I can just email them and be like, hey, can you go edit the date or whatever in this file and regenerate it for me so that we don't have to go back through the consultants every time. So we tried to think about that to save money in the future, but we'll see how it goes.
Cool. All right. Thank you again for sharing. If nobody else has any questions on Ben's presentation or what we've discussed earlier today, I'm going to go ahead and turn around for any partner updates. If anybody would like to come off with me virtually and share, now is your chance before we wrap up the meeting.
So just one thing for locality staff, the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act resilience guidelines were recently put out for an informal public comment period. So if that's something that you are interested in, we would encourage you to kind of take it, look at those documents, and provide any feedback you can to DEQ on what they've come up with. And we're going to be talking about that with our localities before, but I believe the public comment period ends May 3rd. When they're due. So yeah, just definitely take a look at those.
Thank you. Were there any specific things that you would call out that people should look at in the guidelines? Any specific?
No, I think just generally speaking, the whole idea of having these is to make sure that they're actually useful to localities. So if there's something that's missing from them, that DEQ should hear about that. There is a model ordinance that's in there. So it's a bunch of different things in there, and see that Mark just looks like it's put that chat maybe.
Yeah, that's the link to the model ordinance, the resiliency draft guidelines and things on the EQ site. We started looking over it here in Smithfield and started making notes and things and comments that hopefully can be addressed. But yeah.
Thank you, Mark and Ben, for highlighting that. There are also some upcoming deadlines that brought up to mind. There are some CRS webinars that you can access via CRS resources in the next few weeks. Sorry, I'm going to find my button. Again, the Coastal Resilience Web Explorer deadline is April 1st. If you have any projects that you wanted to include, it's your last chance to have those incorporated in the plan phase 2. We are going to send out one more reminder that the Coastal Resilience and Trees Fund, which is for small scale nature-based projects, our deadline is April 5th, next Friday. The eligibility are any localities, civic groups, volunteer groups in the coastal zone, and the projects should be shovel ready. And these are the cost caps for those projects. And round 4 awards of the CFPF were announced, and I shared the links to both the press release and the full website in our email with the agenda for this meeting. We only have a couple of minutes left if anybody wanted to share about a CFPF award that their locality received before we close out the meeting, now would be your opportunity to do that. Okay, hearing none, that's all that I have for today. Thank you guys for coming. We have, again, our CRS training online. You guys are familiar. We bring it up every time. And these are the webinars I mentioned. If anybody's interested in registering, the link will be in the PowerPoint that's sent out after this. So thank you guys.
Hey, Savannah, before we wrap up, can I just do a quick plug for VFMA's seminar next week?
Please, yes.
So VFMA is partnering with ASCE again to do a technical seminar in Virginia Beach. It is next week on April 4th at the Westin Virginia Beach. So if you are interested, I don't actually know where the registration link is. I will send it to Savannah so she can send it out to the group afterwards. I think it might have been sent out already, but that's out there. And then we are going to be opening the call for abstracts and hopefully the sponsorship options for the 2024 VFMA conference as well. On that day, we'll announce it at the workshop. So keep an eye out for that. The VFMA conference will be in Richmond again this year on October 24th and 25th, which is a Thursday, Friday, at the same place, the Westin in Richmond. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. Okay, if that's all that we have for today, we'll say goodbye. Thank you for attending and for engaging. And if you would like to attend in person in future meetings, or there's a reason that you have not been, please feel free to reach out to me via email with any suggestions. We'd love to increase in-person participation where possible and feasible. I know that as we grow, people can't travel from around the state, but we'd love to see you guys here. And thank you all. Great. We're gonna end the meeting. Bye.